Hello, everyone. Today we're going to cover chapter 4, and we're going to begin discussing presentations. Presentations. A few things to remember, and these slides are posted on Blackboard within your content folder, course content folder. But a few things to keep in mind when you're presenting. The number one thing is to know your audience, right? And this, it sounds cliche, but it isn't. Like when you think about presenting, you got to understand to a greater extent who you're talking to. Reason being is because when you are talking to someone, obviously you don't want them to be, well, maybe you do. I don't know, but I know when I'm presenting or when I'm in the presence of someone speaking, I don't want to be disengaged, right? I want to feel as though this speaker is capturing my attention. I want to be intrigued, in other words. I want them to say things. I came here or I'm forced to be here, right? But I want them to capture my attention first and foremost. But the way to do that is you got to understand who you're talking to. I won't give, obviously I'm presenting now, but I wouldn't give this presentation to if I'm talking to some teenagers, or I wouldn't give this presentation if I'm talking to young students, like children 12 and below. Like they're not going to be wanting to hear anything about presentations, likely because they're not going to be presenting, right? So the first thing to always keep in mind is who are you presenting to so that you can help understand the information that you're providing actually resonates with your audience. Secondly, what is my purpose? What are you trying to convey here? Like, why is this presentation even necessary? And then, are you equipped to even do this presentation? Like, do you have all the information? Do you have all the information to share with the audience that will either enlighten them, motivate them, or whatever you're there to present or speak? Do you have all the information to present to them? And a couple of these other things, obviously, when am I on the program and why am I giving this talk and how long should I talk? The biggest thing I would say within the three of those is how long you should talk. How long are you speaking for? Because typically when you're on the program, you are given a certain amount of time to speak if it's a program. But if it may not be a program, right, and you may be presenting to your boss, you may be in this course doing a presentation, which is your second project. And there is a certain amount of time that I'm going to ask you to speak on. And usually we don't want you to go over the allotted time, but you also don't want to make your presentations too short because you want to make sure you have enough information to share with me or with your audience. One thing I want to do, and I want to jump to presentations, and then I'll come back to tips on presentations. And I'm going to share, this is in your book, but let me just jump down to things you don't want to do on your slides if you have slides. You don't want to have annoying slides, clearly. You don't want to have annoying slides, but you also, some things you don't want to do. I'm going to move, this is in your book. Move this over so that you can see my screen. You also don't want to have a busy slide, right? So when you're presenting, you want to make sure your the audience isn't reading your slides. You know, they're not seeing that, oh man, look, what does this mean? Or if you look at this graph down here on number three, like they can't even read it. It's so busy, but they're trying to figure out what this graph means. I wouldn't make this graph so big on one of my slides. You know what I would do? I would create bullet points uh, that would lead up to this. Explain what you're going to show them in your graph first. So then when they see the graph, it won't be so bad. They already have in mind what it is that you're talking about. And your graph just reflects some information that you provided for them a previous slide. Also, you don't want to make it too wordy, like in this conclusion. You want the conclusion to be very brief in your slides. A couple, 2 or 3 words: impact, motivation, or whatever it is that you're presenting. Like, we're going to do a presentation on the history of engineering. And in conclusion, the history of engineering. And then you can have a bullet point. It's from the future, present to the past, or past, present to future. Because that's what your presentation is going to be over: past, present, and future of engineering. And in conclusion, and you discuss this, you don't have to have it written in your slide. So this is just a few examples, but these are some better examples. Not. These are some more improved examples of your slides and how they should be. Um, you see how it's a lot of white space. You want a lot of space in between your pictures. They don't. The audience doesn't necessarily have to see everything that's on California, but if you have it bulleted, then you can describe what it is that's on California, if that makes sense. And you also, again, with this chart here, you want to describe that prior to showing the graph. And in conclusion, you want to have bullet points, and you want to have it spaced to where you can elaborate on what your bullets are indicating. You don't have to tell them on the conclusion what your conclusion is. Just indicate it. And so these are some tips for creating your slides. And so if you go through the presentation, it also talks about some formulas: short, simple, strength, and sincere. I like that. So on your slides, words should be short. Sentences should be short. It doesn't have to be paragraphs on your slides. Simple phrases. You don't want to have anything too wordy or lengthy, right? You want to be able to, what your presentation is for is trigger points, right? When you go from one slide to another slide, it's triggering your mind to remember what it is that you're going to talk about next. Your slides aren't there to tell the people what you're talking about. It's really for you. It's really for you. So to help you stay engaged with your audience so that you don't be standing there forgetting what it is that you were going to say. Oh man, what was I going to say? It's like your slide helps you. It keys you in. It keys you to the next point. So that's how you really want to look at your slides. The structure of it. It's like writing a, I guess, a research paper in a sense. You have your introduction, you got your body, and you have your conclusion. So your introduction is always your attention grabber. What are you there to talk about? You want to at least, you want to show them that initially what we're here to talk about. Some type of a grabber to just clue them in, whether that is a statistical fact, whether that is some type of a joke pertaining to what it is that you're going to be talking about. Because you're presenting, you want to engage, you want your audience to be engaged. And then your body is just, it's all of the information within bullet points of what you're going to be sharing with your audience. And then you just summarize your points in your conclusion. And so those are some tips on the structure of your presentation. Obviously, your font is also important. Larger is better, but you don't want it so large where all they can see is like that huge bullet point that you're making. So you want to find a happy medium, right? You want to make sure font is a perfect size. And I would say this, so when you are creating your presentation, go into your presentation view to see how the words are showing when you're in the presentation view. Because if that's a great indicator to tell you whether or not the audience will be able to read it in the very back. But in your case, you don't have to worry about that when you're, sharing your presentation video with me. I'll be able to see it. Well, maybe, the font's not too small. I should be able to see it. I could at least zoom in on it. Um, but when you're presenting to your bosses, when you're out in the work field, or if you are in class and you're having to go in front of the class and present, you want to be sure that the people in the back can read your slides. And I know you're thinking, but I thought the slides were for me. They are for you, but you want to be able to make sure you can read them as well. But in some points, right, some bullet points that you are pointing to, that you are sharing information directly from your slides, you do want your audience to be able to see what it is that you're saying or what it is that you're talking about. So just keep that in mind. And what's next? We talked about that, writing long sentences. We also talked about using, oh, I didn't speak on this. Colors within your presentation. I noticed this slide says don't use annoying colors, but you don't want to have colors that are so, I'll say it like this. Sometimes colors can mean certain things, like within your slides. Red usually means, okay, hazardous, don't do it, stop, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have your green, which means go, positive. Let's make sure, everything's flowing. But when they say annoying colors, I'd say, because when I was doing a training not too long ago, and it was titled Speaking with Impact. Everything in your presentations has some sort of a meaning. And everything within your presentation slides are either going to capture your audience or is going to distract your audience. So you want to keep that in mind. You want to be sure that your presentation slides aren't distracting your audience. So I was instructed within that training to make sure you use colors, stick with your same color scheme. So when you are showing your slides, all your colors are matching. You don't have like a yellow slide, then next thing you know, you got this green slide, then the next slide is like this awkward color that nobody even knows what it is, and they're trying to figure it out. Wow, their slides are really bright, or wow, they really chose the rainbow here. And and you don't want your audience thinking that way. Because if you see the slides here, you have the same colors or within these slides. You have your navy, you have your white, you have your gray, charcoal gray, a little bit of black, red, and then a little bit of violet. But what you see is a lot of space in each slide. So you don't want to use colors that are just so mixed matched that the audience is just constantly blown away from each color that you use. You also don't want to pick weird color schemes that are too light, like this color, this violet or this pastel purple, whatever color this is, light purple on a white background. You don't want to do that. Or you don't want to have this bright yellow on a white background. It's like nobody can see that. But you also don't want a black slide with bright yellow because it's just like you're so stuck in their face unless you're trying to convey a point. If you're trying to convey a point with a statement and you have a black slide and you just wanting this to stand out to them as cautionary, like no, 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 no. Yes, that's okay. But all your slides should have those same colors within them so that it doesn't become, again, a distraction. So those are some things to just keep in mind. Again, these are colors on dark canvases that are going to be difficult to see. You don't want to do that. Avoid that. Avoid using dark print or font on dark backgrounds. You don't want to use things like textured backgrounds. So it also makes it difficult to see. And all of these slides, you can go and review them because these are just really good tips for presenting. And also animations. You don't want the squiggly coming in or the spiral or the flipping and the bouncing. All of that's cool whenever you are like playing around with presentation, trying to make it look cool. But whenever you're doing a professional presentation, avoid it. Like don't do it. Don't do it. And such as that. It's distracting. It's so distracting, right? That just was distracting to me just then. So please avoid that. And I do hope that I have helped you. Oh, we have more distracting animations. Wow. Please avoid all of those things. And the last tip to keep in mind, or the last couple tips to keep in mind is to eye contact. Make sure you're making eye contact with your audience. Try to be as poised as possible. I know you're going to be nervous, but try to maintain your poise as possible, as much as you possibly can. In order to do these things, you should practice. And I always tell my students how I become so calm or poised whenever I'm presenting. I role play. I'll get in the mirror and I'll just start talking, looking at myself, and I'm watching myself as I talk because it helps me to see how other people are going to see me when I'm speaking. Things that I may do that are weird, like if I'm holding my mouth a certain way, wait, why am I holding my mouth that way? And so now I'm thinking to myself as I'm looking at myself, role play, I'm changing how my body is positioned to the mirror so that when I'm in front of an audience, I can imagine myself in front of the mirror, seeing myself and how I'm presenting, adjusting myself, adjusting my facial expressions, making sure I'm maintaining either a serious focus, not a mean or a frown faced, but like a serious focus, or if I'm telling a joke, I do a smile. Or if I'm being a bit dry humor, I'll make sure I maintain my focus and my facial expression so that, the joke doesn't come off as if I'm up here making a joke. But the audience laughs because they were like, wow, he was serious. And oh man, he has such good dry humor. But however it is that I'm wanting to be positioned to the audience, I make sure I'm working on that in front of the mirror. And you never want to read your notes. You don't want to be in front of a group of people reading your notes. So keep that in mind. And this is all I have for presentations. The next group of slides will be technical writing. Thank you. Technical writing. So when it comes to technical writing, as an engineer, you have to remember, or things to keep in mind, is as engineers, we communicate in various ways, understanding what all forms of communication that we are utilizing to convey messages. One would be I guess big, the biggest one, or the most critical one from a design engineering standpoint, is drawings. We utilize drawings to convey a message to whomever we are sharing this drawing with to make whatever it is that we've designed. And so in that, when you're communicating this document, you want to always keep in mind they're relying upon you to have all the information they need to make whatever component is on that drawing, whether it's electrical, whether it is electrical, I'm sorry, whether it's electrical, chemical, whether it's mechanical. Usually there aren't very many drawings on chemical, but if you are trying to show molecular structures, if you're trying to show chemical reactions, things of that nature, however you're showing that, to give it to a chemist, to give it to whomever is in the lab to make these mixtures, however that's conveyed, it's going to be conveyed either on a document or some sense of a drawing. But you want to make sure all the information is there. And that's really what's key, the key thing that I'm wanting to elaborate within these set of slides, making sure, ensuring you have all of the information within your document. So with that being said, proofreading is always going to be proofreading or editing, reviewing multiple times is very key. Other forms of documents that you'll be writing as an engineer is procedures. I've written several procedures. You'll write a ton of uh, what we would call not necessarily memos, but like a review or an analysis of something that has happened. And it's like a report in the form of you're writing it in the form of a report, but it's not an essay. So it's not a length of it's not necessarily a length of pages. Your boss isn't requiring you to do a length of pages, but your boss is requiring you to tell the entire story. And I'll give you an example. There was a big issue I had uh, when I was in production chokes. When I worked in the sustaining department of production chokes, and so sustaining just means whenever there's an issue with the choke, out in the field, a customer has a problem, it comes to me. That is, if there was a failure when it shouldn't have failed, or you know, if the customer is saying this seal wore out before it should have, or the stem on the choke wore out before it should have, any type of an issue that happens on that choke, which a choke is essentially a valve. Choke is just what the terminology we use because it chokes the pressure and the flow coming out of a well. That's why we use the term choke. But it's essentially just a valve. But when that customer is utilizing this valve or this choke out in the field and it doesn't perform in the manner that it should, the issue comes to me. And there was a particular time when the choke came to me, it had failed, and the customer was like, they don't understand why it failed. And as a matter of fact, chokes, as I said, it chokes the flow and the pressure, the inlet pressure. And then on the outlet of the choke, it's a lower pressure and a lower flow rate. But in this particular case, the customer was explaining to us, well, the inlet and the outlet flow and pressure equalized. So that meant that told us immediately that the choke wasn't performing in the way that it should. And they told us other things um, within this complaint about what happened. They explained that there was a bang, some sounds like something blew up inside of the choke. And then when we got the choke, first thing I did to diagnose the problem was disassemble the choke. We had to take it apart, see what was going on. And once I discovered what was going on, then I had to figure out why it happened. Then after I figured, and in order for me to do that, I had to get another choke just like it and try to recreate what they did out in the field inside of my lab. And when I did that, I had to write a report on the findings. I had to write a report, and the report including what I did. It also included um, all of the steps that I took to get to that point, such as, diagnosing the issue, disassembling the choke, analyzing the part that failed, sending it off to get it examined to see if there was any issues with the material, and there wasn't at that within that issue. And so I had to write this report that included all of these things because I had to tell the story. I have to tell the story to my boss. I had to tell the story to Chevron, who was our customer at the time. I had to share with them everything that happened. And I have to ensure, I had to help convince them that this problem was taken care of and you can continue to buy our chokes. This was an anomaly. I had to make sure that was conveyed because it was an anomaly. It wasn't the choke's fault. It turned out to be another component's fault. And I had to help them to see that within the report that I wrote. So it required me to have all the information. It required me, again, if you see this writing hint, provide all information requested and answer all questions. But sometimes the information isn't requested, and but there's just a lot of questions being asked, right? So you have to provide all the information to answer all of those questions. You also have to make sure your document doesn't have a ton of errors. The font is consistent. You want to make sure that the as you learned when you were in high school, your margins are all the same, it's easy to read. You don't have a bunch of paragraphs stacked on each other. You don't have run-on sentences. Utilizing um you're not trying to make a point and then you continue to carry it on and on and on. You want to be very concise, like a drawing. You want the drawing to be concise. You want, if you're writing a report and reducing data, you want your data, your graphs to be concise. Other things to think about whenever you're writing a report is, well, as you would be in presenting orally, right? You want to capture your audience, but in technical writing, it's not so much about capturing your audience as much as it is about providing your audience with all the information that they're looking for. Slightly different. So you don't want to be up there telling jokes in your report, making making it as making whatever information you're providing to this person or audience that's reading this document. You don't want them to think that you're not serious in what it is that what serious with the information that you're providing, right? Think of me trying to convey to Chevron the choke that failed, and I'm making jokes in my report. Yeah, they wouldn't be too happy. What did Corey mean by this? What was he trying to convey here? So no, you don't want to be make jokes. It's not an entertaining document. It's a report. It's a procedure. It's also we write hazard analyses, so you want to make sure you have a professional tone. So these are things to just keep in mind. Other things to keep in mind is you don't want to have a document that, and I said this earlier, but you're not writing a novel. Y- you just want to make sure you provide the information to the questions, to whatever the issue is. You want to make sure you are providing that solution or that resolution, right? And so those are the things to just keep in mind. Also, just for formatting, whenever you're creating, and this is always key, just keep in mind, you always want to give them some type of iconography. You want to give them graphs. You want to give them tables because you don't want it to, of course, you want to have words, but you want to give them things to break up their reading so that they can see a picture and they can look at a table and they can read this table. And then when you have these charts in a report, you just want to make sure everything is labeled. You also want to make sure you have when I was writing reports for tests that I ran when I first started working at the company I'm currently with, I was instructed that, hey, do a table of graphs. So maybe they want to just go right to that graph and look at that data and do a comparative and just view the comparison between, how this product, how this product held up during tests versus this product while it was being tested. So you also want to make sure your tables and figures are labeled accordingly. Make sure everything is labeled. You want to have a table of content just so that, you know, they can go through if you're writing a report that's lengthy, you want to have a table of content. But if you're writing a report such as I was to discuss this issue that happened, no, you don't need a table of content because it's a report, but it's really like a memo. I wrote that in more of like a memo style. I wrote it, it was like a letter almost. It's like, dear Chevron, and I didn't say dear. It was to whom it may concern, and I was presenting it to Chevron, and I put the date on it at the top, and I talked about when it happened. When did the failure occur? And I dated when I gave them a timeline within that report or that memo that I wrote. But if you're writing a test report, yeah, a test report for a particular test that you completed in a lab, just as you are going to be doing for your reports within this course. Yes, you can include a table of content. That's not required. I have a template, so follow the template. So I'm not telling you to do that. But a table of content, if you are out in the field working, or, if you not in the field, but if you are working for a particular company or corporation and you're having to write this big report, yeah, include a table of content. You don't have to do it again. You don't have to do it for this course. Just keeping that in mind. Other hints is decimal places, keeping it all consistent. You want to put the zero in front of the two, three. And if you're discussing money, make sure you're putting the dollar sign if you're including that in your text. And these are just some other hints throughout this lecture. I'm not going to read all of them. But here's also the key. This is also something just when you're writing your report, just structure. This is a one-page memo, and this is the style of reporting that I did when I was discussing the issue. And those are things that, again, you can review. And then if you're writing a short report, that's the format of your short report. And then these are just other structures that you could go and review on your own time whenever you review this lecture. But always check it twice. Read it out loud. Make sure when you're reviewing it, you're reading it back to yourself. Did what you just read make sense? Did it sound like two sentences in one? Or did it not sound like a complete sentence? I always read back things that I write because sometimes when I'm writing it and it's just really coming out of my mind onto the paper, but you want to make sure you clean up a lot of your paragraphs and your sentences when you're writing. And so always review it. Make sure it flows correctly. Have someone else read it to see if it makes sense to them. If you were trying to convey a point, you don't want to turn in sloppy work. That is critical. You do not want to turn in sloppy work. So make sure whatever technical document you're writing or whatever type of technical document you are passing on to someone for in a machine shop or for to an electrical technician, the person that's reading your document needs to have all the information. It needs to be concise and definitely needs to make sense. All right, this is chapter 4, communication. Hope I've helped you in some form or fashion. Thank you for listening.